The laughter echoed across the gym. A massive bodybuilder stood near the mirror, flexing his arms as thick as tree trunks, veins crawling over his skin like cables. Then his eyes landed on a quiet man stretching in the corner. He scoffed. "Yo, is that all?" He pointed openly. "Those are the arms everyone talks about?" A few people chuckled. Some looked away uncomfortably. Others turned their phones slightly, sensing something was about to happen. The bodybuilder took a step closer. "Bro, no offense," he said loudly, smirking, "but my warm-up weights have bigger arms than you." The quiet man didn't respond. Steven Seagal remained focused, slowly rolling his shoulders, breathing steady. No flexing, no anger, no ego. Just calm. That silence only made the mockery worse. "Hey!" The bodybuilder snapped. "I'm talking to you. What is this yoga hour?" Laughter rippled again. One trainer paused mid-set. Something about the situation felt off. Steven Seagal finally looked up. His eyes were calm, almost detached. Not scared, not offended, just observant. The bodybuilder laughed even harder. "Man, you should quit this gym. This isn't for weak guys." What no one in that room understood was this. They weren't looking at weak arms. They were looking at decades of discipline, at hands trained not to lift, but to control. Steven didn't raise his voice, didn't straighten his posture, didn't try to explain who he was. He simply stood there, and in that moment, the gym felt different, quieter, heavier. A man near the squat rack whispered, "Why do I feel like this isn't going to end well?" The bodybuilder smirked, full of confidence, full of muscles and completely blind to what stood in front of him. Because real danger doesn't shout, it doesn't flex in mirrors, it waits. And in just a few seconds, every person in that gym was about to learn the difference between looking strong and being dangerous. Iron Core Gym was at its loudest. It was late afternoon, peak hour, when the place felt more like a battleground than a fitness center. Heavy bass thumped through the speakers, metal plates clanged, the air smelled of sweat, rubber mats, and ambition. Mirrors lined the walls, reflecting rows of flexed arms, flared lats, and carefully rehearsed confidence. This was where people came to be seen, and no one loved being seen more than Jake. Jake was the kind of bodybuilder whose presence announced itself before he even spoke. Oversized tank top, skin-tight compression shorts, lifting belt worn even when he wasn't lifting. His arms were permanently pumped, chest pushed forward, chin tilted slightly upward, as if the world itself was impressed by him. He moved through the gym like he owned it. Staff greeted him with forced smiles. New members watched him with a mix of awe and insecurity. Jake thrived on it. He cracked jokes between sets, dropped weights louder than necessary, and made sure every mirror knew his reflection by heart. To Jake, strength was simple: big muscles, big presence, big respect, and anyone who didn't fit that image didn't belong. That was when Steven Seagal walked in. No announcement, no entourage, no flashy gym clothes. Just a plain black hoodie, loose training pants, and worn sneakers. He scanned the room briefly, not searching for attention, but for space. He chose the far corner. While others rushed to benches and racks, Steven placed his bag down neatly, removed his hoodie, and began warming up. Slow shoulder rotations, controlled wrist movements, calm breathing, everything deliberate, everything quiet. No one noticed him at first, and that was exactly how he liked it. Jake, however, noticed everything. Between flexing for his phone camera and shouting advice no one asked for, his eyes drifted toward the corner mirror. That's when he saw Steven. Jake frowned. "Who's that?" he muttered to his friends, nodding toward the corner. They followed his gaze. A man. Average build. No pump. No visible bulging muscles. One friend shrugged. "Probably new." Jake snorted. "New? Or lost?" He laughed loudly enough for nearby lifters to hear. A few joined in without even knowing why. Jake watched Steven stretch slow, controlled, unbothered, and something about it irritated him. Not fear, not threat, disinterest. Steven wasn't watching anyone, wasn't impressed, wasn't playing the gym's unspoken hierarchy game. To Jake, that felt like disrespect. "Yo," Jake called out, raising his voice. "You planning to lift today, or just meditate?" Steven didn't respond. The music kept playing. Weights kept dropping. Jake raised his eyebrows, amused. "Wow. Silent type, huh?" A few people laughed. One woman glanced toward Steven, then looked away. A trainer near the desk noticed the exchange and shifted uncomfortably. Steven continued warming up. His movements were precise, wrists rotating as if testing angles, fingers flexing and relaxing. It looked almost practiced, not random. Jake scoffed. "Man's arms don't even fill the sleeves," he whispered loudly to his friends. "Bet he thinks push-ups are hardcore." He stepped closer, invading Steven's space. Still no reaction, and that, more than anything, fed Jake's ego. "Hey," Jake said, louder now. "This gym's for serious lifters. You sure you're in the right place?" Steven finally looked up, not startled, not annoyed, just calm. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Jake felt it, something subtle. Not intimidation, exactly. More like pressure. As if he'd stepped too close to something he didn't understand. But the feeling passed. Or rather, Jake ignored it. Because when you're used to being the strongest person in the room, you assume you always will be. Steven gave no reply. He looked away and continued stretching. That silence sparked whispers across the gym. Phones subtly angled upward. Someone muttered, "This is getting awkward." The trainer's jaw tightened. Jake smiled. In his mind, this wasn't bullying. It was entertainment. What he didn't realize was that this wasn't the beginning of a joke. It was the beginning of a lesson. And the quiet man in the corner, the one everyone underestimated, had been teaching lessons long before muscles became fashionable. Lessons that didn't require mirrors. Lessons that ended painlessly, or painfully, depending on how far someone chose to push. And Jake was pushing. Jake thrived on reactions. A smirk, a flinch, an embarrassed laugh. That was usually all it took for him to feel victorious. But the man in the corner offered none of it. No irritation, no submission, just that same controlled calm like a still lake untouched by wind. That bothered Jake more than any insult ever could. He rolled his shoulders, stepped closer, and spoke again, louder this time. "So seriously," Jake said, tilting his head as if examining a child. "What are you actually training for with stretches like that? Bingo night?" A few people chuckled. Nervous laughs. Forced laughs. Steven didn't look at him. Jake glanced around, feeding off the attention. "Come on, guys. You see those arms? I've got veins with more muscle than that." The laughter grew a little louder, but beneath it, something else crept in. Unease. A woman near the cable machine stopped mid-rep. The trainer near the desk crossed his arms, eyes fixed on Jake. A man near the squat rack shook his head slightly. Steven slowly finished his wrist rotation. Then he stood, not aggressively, not dramatically, just upright. The music felt suddenly too loud. Or maybe it was the silence that followed, the kind you don't notice until it arrives. Steven faced Jake fully now. Up close, Jake could see lines on his face, not age lines exactly, but something else. Focus, stillness. The kind of look you see in people who have spent years paying attention to danger. Jake laughed to mask the flicker of doubt he felt. "What? You gonna lecture me?" he said. "Go ahead. Enlighten us." Steven spoke quietly. "Strength," he said, "has many forms." Jake scoffed. "Yeah? Like what? Positive thinking." Some laughed again, but fewer this time. Steven's voice didn't rise. "Control," he continued. "Balance, timing." Jake waved his hand dismissively. "Bro, this isn't a philosophy class. This is a gym." Steven nodded once, as if acknowledging a fact. "Yes," he said. "And gyms teach bodies, not always minds." That stung. Jake stepped closer, chest nearly touching Steven's shoulder. He wanted dominance, physical presence, proof. "Look around," Jake said, spreading his arms. "These people respect strength, real strength. You want respect? Earn it." Steven met his eyes. "Forcing attention isn't earning respect," he replied. That was enough. Jake shoved him. Not hard, just enough to provoke, to humiliate. To get a reaction on camera. A phone somewhere clicked to record. The trainer took a step forward. "Hey." Steven's feet shifted. Not backward. Not away. Just enough. The shove didn't move him the way Jake expected. It was like pushing into a doorframe. Solid. Grounded. Jake frowned. "What? You planted your feet?" He laughed, trying again harder. Steven's hand came up. Not fast. Not slow. Precise. He caught Jake's wrist. Not gripping, guiding. Jake felt it immediately. A strange pressure. Not pain yet, but wrongness. His wrist was turned at an angle that didn't feel natural. "What is that?" Jake muttered, still trying to sound confident. Stephen leaned in slightly, voice low enough that only Jake could hear. An invitation to stop. Jake yanked his arm, but the pressure increased, subtle, exact. Pain bloomed sharply, quick and bright. His grin vanished. "Hey, let go." Jake snapped. Stephen loosened his hand just a fraction. The gym was silent now. Even the music seemed distant. Dozens of eyes locked onto the pair. Jake's ego screamed louder than his reason. "You think you can do something with that?" he barked. "You think you're special?" Stephen released his wrist. Jake jerked his arm back, rubbing it. Embarrassed. "What, scared?" Jake said quickly, louder than before. "That all you've got?" Stephen didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked toward the open mat space near the mirrors. Jake blinked. "Where you going?" he called. "Running away?" Stephen stopped at the edge of the mat. He turned. "Your choice," he said calmly. "You can walk away, or you can continue." The trainer swallowed hard. A man near the dumbbells whispered, "This is a bad idea." Jake felt every eye on him now. Backing down wasn't an option. Not with phones out. Not with his reputation on the line. He cracked his neck. "Fine," Jake said, stepping forward. "Let's continue." What Jake didn't realize, what no one there truly understood yet, was that the conflict had already ended. He just hadn't felt it. Not yet. The air in Iron Core Gym felt different now. Not louder. Not quieter. Heavier. Stephen stood at the edge of the mat. Relaxed. Hands loose at his sides. No fighting stance. No clenched fists. He looked almost bored. As if what was happening wasn't unusual to him at all. Jake stepped onto the mat with exaggerated confidence. He rolled his shoulders, shook out his arms, and forced a grin for the phone still pointed in his direction. "Let's make this quick," he said loudly. "I've got a workout to finish." No one laughed this time. People backed away instinctively, forming a loose circle. A few gym members whispered to each other. A woman near the mirrors mouthed, "This is crazy." The trainer hovered close, unsure whether to intervene or wait. Stephen glanced around once, not at the crowd, but at the space itself. The floor, the distance, the angles. His eyes tracked details Jake would never think to notice. Then he looked back at Jake. "Whenever you're ready," Stephen said. Jake lunged forward. It wasn't a trained strike, just raw strength, momentum driven by anger and pride. He reached to grab Stephen's shoulders, planning to shove him down, maybe embarrass him enough to end this. But Stephen moved. Not backward, sideways. Jake felt empty air where resistance should have been. His grip found nothing. His balance shifted unexpectedly. His weight suddenly working against him instead of for him. Before he could correct himself, Stephen's hand touched his forearm. Not grabbed, placed. Jake felt pressure again, sharper this time. His elbow bent at a strange angle. His shoulder followed without his permission. His feet moved before his brain could catch up. "What the?" Jake gasped. The crowd let out a collective breath. Stephen guided him a half step forward, then turned. The motion was smooth, almost gentle, like redirecting water. Jake stumbled, tried to plant his foot, but his body refused to cooperate. Pain flashed, not explosive, focused, deep inside the joint. Jake cried out as his momentum disappeared beneath him. He dropped to one knee, then the mat, his arm trapped in a position that made his muscles meaningless. Stephen still hadn't raised his voice. "Hitting harder won't help," he said calmly. "You need alignment." Jake thrashed, instinct overpowering logic. The movement only made it worse. A sharp cry escaped his throat as his chest hit the mat. "Stop!" someone yelled. The trainer rushed forward but froze when Stephen raised one finger slightly, not threatening, just signaling patience. Stephen eased the pressure just enough for Jake to breathe. The gym was silent now. No phones shaking, no music, no laughter, only the sound of Jake's strained breathing against the mat. Stephen knelt beside him, voice low but steady. "Listen carefully," he said. "You're not hurt. But if you keep resisting, you will be." Jake swallowed hard. His world had narrowed down to pain, embarrassment, and a terrifying realization. Nothing he did mattered right now. "How?" Jake wheezed. "How are you doing this?" Stephen didn't answer the question. Instead, He slowly released Jake's arm and stepped back. Jake rolled onto his side, clutching his elbow, shock written across his face. His arm still worked. Nothing broken. But something inside him had shifted, something much harder to repair. Steven stood, adjusted his sleeve, and looked around the gym. Faces stared back at him wide-eyed, silent, uncertain. "This isn't a performance," Steven said evenly. "And it's not a competition." He looked down at Jake. "It's a reminder." Jake avoided his gaze. The trainer finally stepped in, helping Jake sit upright. "You okay?" he asked. Jake nodded stiffly, humiliated. Yeah. Steven picked up his bag and stepped off the mat. No applause followed. No cheers. Just silence. And something else. Respect, the kind that doesn't need noise. As Steven walked back toward the corner where he'd been stretching moments earlier, people subtly moved out of his way. Not out of fear, out of understanding. Because everyone in that room had just learned the same lesson. Muscle can overpower people, but skill can overpower muscle. And true power doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself quietly when pushed too far. The gym stayed still, like the air itself was holding its breath. Jake sat on the mat, rubbing his elbow, trying to catch his breath, trying to regain some shred of dignity. His chest heaved, sweat dripping down his forehead. For the first time, he felt small, not physically, but inside. Every eye in the gym bore into him, not with mockery, but with a sober understanding. The man he'd belittled was not ordinary. Steven Seagal, calm as ever, adjusted his hoodie and zipped it up slowly. He turned toward the gym's entrance, and that's when a black SUV pulled up outside. Its engine cut off abruptly. Moments later, 3 sharply dressed men entered, carrying folders, tablets, and an air of authority. "Mr. Seagal," the tallest executive called, striding forward. "We've been waiting for you." The murmurs started in the gym. "Who are they? Is he? Wait, that's Steven Seagal." Voices overlapped, whispers growing into gasps. Jake's head snapped up. His mouth opened, but no words came out. A cold sweat spread across his back. His mind tried to process what he was seeing. The calm man who had just dismantled him physically with effortless precision wasn't just any gym goer. He was someone far more important than Jake could imagine. "Yes," one of the executives said firmly, glancing at the gym members. "He's the new majority owner of Iron Core Gym." Effective immediately, the words hit Jake like a punch stronger than any he had felt before. The room seemed to tilt. A mix of disbelief, fear, and awe swept through the gym. Jake's pride, which had been unshakable for years, crumbled in an instant. The muscles he had worked so hard to show off, the arrogance he had wielded like a weapon, all of it meant nothing in this moment. The man he had mocked owned the place. I just came to train," Jake stammered, voice cracking slightly, his bravado evaporating. "I didn't know." Steven Seagal walked slowly toward him. Every step measured, calm and unhurried. The gym watched in silence. This wasn't a confrontation anymore. It was a reckoning. "I understand," Steven said, voice low but firm. "That's exactly the problem. You assumed strength could be measured by size and noise. You assumed respect could be demanded. You were wrong." The staff and gym members looked on, spellbound. The trainers exchanged glances, impressed and slightly terrified. Even some of the bodybuilders who had never questioned their own dominance felt an unfamiliar humility creeping in. Steven paused, letting his words sink in. "I came here to train like anyone else. But some lessons are learned best in the moment. You have a choice. Continue letting ego guide your actions, or learn to respect skill, discipline, and humility." Jake's head hung lower. Every part of him wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he knew there was no argument that could save face now. The gym's silent gaze told him he had reached the bottom of the lesson. One of the executives stepped forward and handed Steven a folder. "These are the official documents. You are now the owner. The changes will be implemented immediately." Steven glanced at the folder, then back at Jake. He nodded once. No smirk. No gloating. Just calm authority. The entire gym understood. The balance of power had shifted. Jake's friends, who had stood laughing and recording just minutes earlier, now looked uneasy. They shifted from foot to foot, realizing that the hierarchy they had celebrated so eagerly had been upended. Humility, not muscle, had won. Stephen turned to the gathered crowd. True strength isn't about intimidation. It's about control, focus, and respect. You can be the strongest person in the room and still be weak if your ego blinds you. He looked directly at Jake. From now on, you will treat everyone from the smallest beginner to the most skilled trainer with the respect they deserve. Not because they are strong, but because respect is earned, not assumed. Jake swallowed hard. He nodded, finally understanding. Not with pride, not with fear, but with acknowledgement. He had been taught a lesson more valuable than any weightlifting achievement. The executives and Stephen made their way to the back office, leaving Jake kneeling on the mat, humbled and silent. The gym returned to normal gradually, but nothing would ever feel the same. The quiet power, the lesson in control, and the demonstration of skill over ego had left a permanent mark. For the first time, Jake didn't care about his muscles or the cameras. All he felt was respect for the man he had underestimated, for the lesson he had received, and for the realization that real strength was something far deeper than he had ever imagined. As Stephen disappeared into the back office, the gym erupted quietly, not with cheering, but with whispered admiration. The man who had entered unnoticed had transformed everyone's perception of power, respect, and true discipline. Even Jake, still kneeling, managed a faint, respectful nod. He had been humbled, he had learned, and he would never forget it, because some lessons are stronger than steel. The air in Iron Core Gym had changed permanently. The weight of what had just happened hung over every corner, every mirrored wall, every dumbbell rack. Phones were down. People weren't whispering about their own workouts anymore. They were whispering about what they had just witnessed. Not a fight, not a spectacle, a lesson. Jake sat on the mat, still clutching his elbow. His chest rose and fell rapidly. Pride, humiliation, and disbelief collided inside him, leaving him unsure of where to look or what to do. For years, he had measured his worth by his strength, his size, and his ability to command attention. That illusion had just shattered in a single, silent demonstration. And the man who had dismantled it all didn't shout, didn't boast, and didn't even flex. Steven Seagal walked calmly toward Jake. Each step deliberate, slow, unhurried, the kind of calm confidence that only comes from decades of discipline. He didn't need to assert dominance. His presence alone carried authority. The entire gym instinctively gave him space, as if gravity had subtly shifted in his favor. "Jake," Stephen said, his voice quiet but carrying unmistakable weight. "You've worked hard. Your body is strong. But strength without control, without respect, is nothing." Jake looked up, his eyes red, face pale. He wanted to argue, to justify, to reclaim some fragment of ego, but the words caught in his throat. Nothing he had done mattered anymore. His arrogance, which had once been a shield, had crumbled in the face of a force he hadn't even realized existed. I didn't know," Jake finally whispered, voice trembling. "I didn't know who you were. I was wrong." Stephen nodded once. Not with a smug grin, not with mockery, just acknowledgement, calm authority. "That's exactly the problem. You assumed knowledge where you had none. You assumed strength where you lacked awareness. You assumed disrespect would go unpunished." A hush swept across the gym. Every member, every trainer, every person holding a phone felt the gravity of the moment. Not fear, exactly. Respect, a deep, silent understanding that they had witnessed something extraordinary, not a fight, but mastery. Stephen glanced at the trainers. "From today, I want every person here to remember one thing. Strength is not measured by size or noise. It's measured by discipline, by skill, and by the respect you show others. No one is beneath you, and no one is above you because of muscle alone." He looked back at Jake. "You have a choice. You can continue on the path of ego, or you can learn to channel your strength properly. The lesson is yours to take." Jake swallowed hard. His pride wanted to argue, to deflect, to blame, but deep down, he understood the truth. This was not about humiliation. This was about growth, about perspective, about learning what it meant to be truly strong. I understand," Jake said quietly, barely above a whisper. I want to learn. I'll respect everyone, not just the strong. I'm sorry. Stephen nodded. The faintest hint of approval touched his lips. Good. That is the first step. Strength with humility is power that lasts. Ego without control is destruction. Turning to the staff, Stephen added, and you, the trainers who observed this, remember. Teaching respect is as important as teaching technique. Some lessons are learned faster through experience than instruction. He paused, glancing around the gym. Everyone was watching, taking it all in. He could have left immediately. But instead, he made sure the lesson landed firmly. And Jake, he said, looking at the kneeling bodybuilder, this is a second chance. Not everyone gets one. Take it seriously. Use your strength wisely. Respect earns more than muscle ever will. Jake's friends, who had been recording moments ago, now stood silently. Their laughter and bravado had vanished. They understood in that moment that true power isn't about appearances, cameras, or who gets noticed. It's about discipline, calm, and measured action. Stephen picked up his bag and walked toward the exit. Each step measured, controlled, quiet. No fanfare. No shouting. No flexing. Just authority, leaving a profound impression on everyone present. The gym was silent for a moment longer. Then whispers began of respect, awe, and reflection. People returned to their workouts slowly. But nothing would feel the same again. The lesson had been delivered. The power dynamic had shifted, humility had been rewarded, and arrogance had been humbled. Jake remained on the mat, still kneeling, but now with a sense of awareness replacing his fear and shame. He had learned something far more valuable than any personal record or gym accolade. A lesson in respect, a lesson in control, a lesson in the true meaning of strength. And in that quiet moment, amidst the clanging of weights and distant thump of the bass, one fact became undeniable to everyone present. Real power doesn't need to shout. Real strength doesn't need to display. And the calmest person in the room is often the one who holds the greatest authority. Jake looked up once more, eyes meeting Stephen's, and gave a faint, sincere nod. Not out of fear, not out of desperation, but out of understanding. He had been humbled. He had been taught, and he would never forget it, because some lessons are stronger than any muscle. The gym had returned to its usual rhythm, or at least it appeared to have. The music thumped again, metal plates clanged, and lifters resumed their routines. But anyone paying attention could feel the shift. The energy was different. The confidence that had once been loud and boastful now carried a humbler tone. Every person there had witnessed something far more important than a workout. They had witnessed a lesson in true strength. Steven Seagal, now walking toward the exit, paused briefly to glance over the room one last time. Not at the mirrors, not at the cameras, but at the people. Those who had laughed, those who had doubted, and even those who had underestimated him. In that glance was a reminder. Power is measured not by the size of your arms, but by the depth of your discipline. Jake remained on the mat, still kneeling, processing everything that had happened. He could feel his muscles, sore from effort but useless in comparison to what he had just experienced. For the first time, he realized that strength without respect is nothing. Ego, arrogance, and showmanship could impress temporarily, but they crumble instantly when confronted with true skill and discipline. The trainers, who had been observing silently, nodded to each other. The lesson was clear. They had spent years teaching form, technique, and strength, but they now knew that the heart behind those movements mattered just as much. Respect and humility could never be ignored in the pursuit of power. Stephen didn't yell. He didn't humiliate anyone. He didn't even flex. His quiet confidence left a louder mark than any display of muscle ever could. That silence, that control, became a lesson for everyone in the room. The loudest, the most aggressive, and the most showy are not always the strongest. True strength often whispers, not shouts. Jake slowly rose to his feet. He could feel the eyes of the gym on him. This was his moment of reflection. He walked to a mirror, flexing not to show power, but to observe himself. And in that reflection, he saw the arrogance fade. He understood that strength was as much mental as it was physical. Control over oneself, patience, and respect for others, these were the marks of true power. The staff approached him. "Are you okay?" one asked. Jake nodded. His pride softened but not broken. I've learned something today. Something I won't forget. And then he turned toward the rest of the gym. You don't need the biggest arms. You don't need the loudest voice. You just need to be aware, disciplined, and respectful. That's real strength. A hush spread over the room again. But this time it wasn't fear. It was understanding. People absorbed the weight of the words, knowing that what they had witnessed would stay with them far longer than any set of reps or personal record. Stephen reached the door. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. His presence lingered. The lesson had been delivered. The gym, once filled with boastful confidence, now had a quiet reverence. Everyone knew something fundamental had changed. Before leaving, Stephen's parting words echoed in the minds of all who had watched. Muscle can impress, ego can intimidate, but discipline, respect, and control, those define true strength. Never judge someone by their size, their appearance, or their silence. The calmest person in the room may very well be the strongest. Jake, now standing fully, clenched his fists not to show off, but to feel the weight of understanding. He had been humbled, taught, and inspired all at once. He would carry this lesson forward, in the gym, in life, in how he treated others. He would remember that every person deserved respect, regardless of size, reputation, or outward appearance. The gym slowly returned to normal activity. Phones went down. Conversations resumed. Weights lifted. Sweat poured. But a subtle awareness remained. The lesson was embedded. Everyone who had been present carried it silently. A quiet reminder that real power is disciplined, patient, and respectful. And for those watching this story from afar, remember this. Respect is strength. Humility is power. Control is authority. These are the marks of true mastery, far beyond what the eye can see or the muscles can show. Type respect in the comments if you agree that real strength is silent, controlled, and humble. Share where you're watching from, and remember the strongest people are often the quietest. They wait, they observe, and when the time comes, they teach lessons louder than any shout, louder than any display, louder than the world expects. Because true strength isn't about size, it's about discipline, humility, and respect, and it leaves a mark that no one will forget.